youth and our elders as well, because I have seen nothing from this community except goodness. And I ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala extend that goodness and make it flourish, so that we are the representatives then of Islam in a very effective way to our neighbors and to our co-workers, inshallah, for the years to come. But thank you very much. I just want to say thank you before I begin or resume with the Shama'il. The topic I was given today was a little bit on the lighter side, which is the sense of humor of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his jesting. We know from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, from the Sahaba who spoke about him, that Kana Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam amzah an-nas. The Prophet, he was among all the people, he was the one who used to joke the most, and he used to make a light atmosphere around him, which is pretty important as an aspect of the Sunnah, because a lot of times we're so serious about the religion and so serious about its practice and so serious about its that things are done in a certain way, and we've tended to ritualize our Islam. Islam has its rituals, but we have also brought to it an attitude of ritualizing it. We ritualize our own rituals, and we make everything into a ritual. And if it's not exactly right, well then, it just bothers us to the point that we can't really get over it. And it might, I'll give an example. If there's someone who, for example, is not wearing their hijab the right way, quote unquote the right way, or someone who is, for example, not, any of these examples that come up in our daily lives, and then the response that we get to it from our fellow brothers and sisters is usually a response that will put us on the defensive or make us feel, inadequate or something like that. But I'll give you an example that happened in the time of the Prophet himself, just to really put things into perspective. During it was on one very cold night, and the Messenger of Allah ﷺ was away with his companions, and they had spent the night in a certain area, just far away from Medina. And one of his companions woke up in a state where he had to perform a ghusl for Fajr prayer. And so when he woke up, he realized this, but there was water there in the area, but he realized that that he had to take a full body bath, but the water was so cold that he decided, I'm not going to do the whole ghusl. I'm not going to do the ghusl. What I'm going to do is, since he did qiyas, right? He made an analogy. He said, if I needed to make wudu and there was no water, I would just use the dirt to cover, up to the hand, the elbows, right? The padding twice, and I'd make tayammum, right? I'd make tayammum. He said instead of making, so if that works for wudu, then for ghusl, all I have to do is just roll around in the dirt. So the more I roll around in the dirt, that'll take care of it, and it'll be as if I made ghusl with the water. So the Prophet ﷺ woke up, and the Sahaba woke up, and they all prayed Fajr together. And as they started the prayer, this companion came in a little bit later, and he was draped from head to toe in dirt. He was just dirty all over, from head to toe. And so the Prophet ﷺ looked at him after the prayer, and he wondered, like, what happened to you, right? And he explained to him the story. And so the Prophet ﷺ said, but there's water here. There's water. And so the man said, yes, but it's so cold. I felt that if I were to taken a full body bath, I would have died. It's that cold. And so the Prophet ﷺ laughed and laughed and laughed, and it was nothing. It was no big deal. But an example like that, the reason I'm bringing this example to mind is that how many of us would have told the man, okay, very good, it's very funny, I got a laugh out of it, but go and make ghusl. There's still time before the sun comes up, go make ghusl. How many of us would have said that? Who are in positions of authority, imams, or even sincere people who want good for our brother, how many of us would have advised him to do that? And there is a difference then between the attitude of the Prophet ﷺ and the tolerance of the Prophet ﷺ and the laughter of the Prophet ﷺ, the appreciation that he had for something that was genuinely funny, and he laughed at it, and whenever he was reminded of it, he laughed again. And it was no thing. It was no thing. And this is, we need to ask ourselves, because this is the same man who actually used to race Aisha. He raced her. He raced against her in public, in open view. Yes, he asked his Sahaba to go on ahead, but they were outside in public racing. The Prophet ﷺ was running, and Aisha was running right next to him, and they were racing, going for the finish line. And that's our Prophet. That's the spirit that he exuded. And so how many of us then, and we know this story, how many of us are playful with our wives? How many of us are playful with our husbands in this fashion, in this way? How many of us can actually hold the hands of our wives when we're walking outside, walking in the park holding their hands? Or we're in public, we don't touch each other. How many of us can actually do that? When Aisha herself, when the tribe of Aqidah was in the masjid, they were in the masjid dancing with their spears, Aisha stood behind the Prophet ﷺ with her cheek against his cheek. And she wasn't even interested in the dancing. She wasn't even interested in that. She just wanted to remain with her cheek pressed against his cheek for as long as he would allow her. And that was her interest. She just wanted to, and that was out in public. That was right in front of everyone. We know about this 1,500 years later, 1,400 years later. We know about this. We actually know about this. We know because this stood out, and it was transferred generation after generation until it reached us. So this is our Prophet. He was a light-hearted person. Kind of maza'an. He used to love to tease people. And he used to love puns. Plays on words. He loved puns. And he also, from as much as he used to laugh, they called him Abdahak. That was one of his nicknames, Abdahak. The one who was constantly laughing and smiling. One of the people who accepted Islam, who converted to Islam, he said, لم يحجبني رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم منذ أسلمت. He said the Prophet ﷺ never prevented access. He never shut me out ever since I became Muslim. Ever since I converted to Islam, he never shut me out. And I never met him except that he smiled in my face. He smiled in my face. And the sunnah of smiling is something that we need to reclaim. We really need to smile. We need to be able to smile warmly. And I want you now to look to the person to your right and then look to the person to your left and give them a big old Kool-Aid smile. A huge Kool-Aid smile. Just smile to their face. Just smile. Just do it. Just smile to the person sitting right next to you. And see how good you feel about yourself. And see how good they feel about you. Because that's charity. That's charity. That's sadaqah. That you've just given sadaqah to your brother and sister. You've just given them sadaqah. And anyone who gets a little extra help is always excited about that. And that is the mark of the Muslim. When the Muslim is at work, he's smiling at work. And when the Muslim is at home, he's smiling in the face of those who are in his presence mostly. And that's what's hardest to do. To smile in the presence of those whom you can easily take for granted. And to be jovial with them. And the hadith that we have from the Prophet smiling, and from how he used to joke, and how he used to tease, those hadith are coming from the people who lived in his household. Anas is telling us those hadith. Aisha is telling us those hadith. Salama is telling us those hadith. those hadiths are coming from people within his household. And because it's easy to be jovial with strangers or jovial in the public. But when you come home and you're jovial with the people at home and you're salubrious with them and you create an atmosphere of bliss with the people at home whom you can take for granted easily. The first people that you can abuse are the people at home. And the people at home for the Prophet ﷺ, they were the people who praised the Prophet the most, who had the best things to say about him. And they shared his intimate life the most out of all the people. To the point that Anas who said in a hadith that it's probably my favorite hadith in the Shama'il literature. He said, خَدَمْتُ رَسُولَ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَآلِهِ وَسَلَّمَ 10 أعوام فَمَا قَالَ لِي أُفٌّ قَطْ. He said, I served the Prophet ﷺ for 10 years, and he never once said uff. He never once in 10 years said never any sigh of frustration that never came out against Anas. And Anas was a young boy. He was raised by the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet raised him as his own son. So of course Anas is going to mess up. Of course Anas as a young boy is going to make mistakes. Of course Anas is not going to do everything according to the preferences of the Prophet ﷺ. But never once did the Prophet ﷺ impart that feeling to Anas. He never felt that the Prophet ﷺ was upset with him. And that is a miracle. That is a miraculous personality that can inspire that feeling in a person that you are completely content with that person no matter what they do. No matter what they do. And Anas messed up. He did mess up. Anas broke bowls. He broke plates. He spilled soup. He messed up. Well, just imagine every time you come home, there's Anas. Every time you read, there's Anas. Every time you turn a corner, there's Anas. You want to make wudu, Anas is bringing you the tray for the water. You want to eat, Anas is bringing you the food. Anas is there 24/7. You can't escape Anas. You can't escape him. Even for Safar, and Anas says, fil hadar was Safar. When he was at home and when he was traveling, I was with him in his service. And that's not even his son. That wasn't even his son. Anas was given to him by his parents. To be raised in that household. That wasn't even his son, and that's how he was with him. And so on one occasion, Anas says that the Prophet ﷺ asked him to do something. And he said the Prophet ﷺ asked me to do something, and I said, Wallahi lan af'al. He said, I swear by God I won't do it. I swear by God, I'm not going to do it. وَفِي نَفْسِي أَنْ أَفْعَلْ. But I was going to do it, but I just wanted to, that's his, teenagers have their phase of rebellion. This is sort of Anas's instant of rebellion, right? And he was a young child before Takbir. So he said, وَفِي نَفْسِي أَنْ أَفْعَلْ. Right? And in myself, I had every intention of doing it, but I just said, I'm not going to do it. And so he went out with the intention of doing it. And then he got distracted by some of the kids who were playing, and he started playing with them. And time goes by, and then all of a sudden, Anas feels a soft hand. A soft hand, which was like silk. He described his hand as silk. The Prophet ﷺ, the softness of his palm was that of silk. And he felt this soft hand on the back of his neck. And the Prophet ﷺ turned Anas's head towards himself. Right? And he said, Ya Unais, oh little Anas, أَفَعَلْتَ مَا أَمَرْتُكَ بِهِ? Did you do what I asked you to do? And Anas said, إِنِّي ذَاهِبٌ يَا رَسُولَ اللَّهِ إِنِّي ذَاهِبٌ. I'm on my way. I was actually on my way to doing it. And so the Prophet ﷺ started laughing and smiling. That's how it was. That's how it was. And he's calling Unais, oh my dear Anas. He could have actually lashed out against him and said, I've been waiting, you're here playing, or shown any frustration. but he's actually going further and showing him how much more endeared, how much dearer Anas is to his heart. And that was his smile. His smile warmed the hearts. And he said, من أحب الأعمال إلى الله إدخال السرور على قلب المسلم. إدخال السرور على قلب المسلم. And the surur, there are many different words for happiness. You have bahja, you have farah, you have bast, you have surur. Farah is a public happiness, it's open. From the fa is the letter that opens or splits, right? So farah, and that's why the Egyptians, they call a wedding celebration a farah, because it's open happiness. Surur comes from sir, which is a secret, it's inward, it's an inward happiness. And the Prophet ﷺ said that the best of the actions is that which is entering this inward contentment into the hearts of the Muslim, to make them feel inwardly content. And one of the easiest ways to do this is through cracking a smile. And so the Prophet ﷺ, he had a nickname for Anas. And he would call him Yadar with a name. Yadar with a name. Oh, little two-eared one. Sorry. He would call him, we have a dear member in this society, this Muslim, his name is, Abu Dan, right? And his grandfather had one ear, right? But he would call Anas the little boy with 2 ears. And that's the way he would call him to. The Sahaba are there and they're eating dinner and the Prophet ﷺ needs something from Anas and he says, oh, little 2-eared one, come. And that's how he would call Anas. A man came to the Prophet ﷺ and said, Ya Rasulullah, he said, Hamilni, I want to go on a trip and I need you to mount me onto a camel. He couldn't find anyone but the Prophet ﷺ to mount him onto a camel. And the Prophet doesn't have anything else to do. So he said, I'm going somewhere, I'm on my way somewhere, and I need you to mount me on a camel. So find me a camel so that I can go on my journey. So the Prophet ﷺ, in his classic response, which is never to say no. He never said no. And he said, "Inni hamiluka ala walad al-naqa." He said, I'm going to find you a baby camel. Just 1 minute, I'll be back with a baby camel. And so the man said, وَمَاذَا أَصْنَعُ بِوَلَدِ النَّاقَةِ مَا أَصْنَعُ بِوَلَدِ النَّاقَةِ. And the Prophet said, he said, so what am I going to do with a baby camel? I'm on my way to, what am I going to do with a baby camel? And so the Prophet said, وَهَلْ تَرِدُ النَّاقَةُ إِلَّا النُّوقِ. He said, show me, idiomatically, he said, show me one camel that isn't a baby camel. Every camel is a baby camel. You just have some baby camels that were just born, and some baby camels that are overgrown baby camels. Like all of us, we're all overgrown babies. No, so we're all babies at one point. That's the point of that. And so they laughed about that. كان يمازح أصحابه ويداعب أهله وكان يعتني بصغار السن. كذلك he used to tease his family members, his wives, and he used to joke with his companions, but he also used to be concerned with the young. And if he passed by the young, he would say, As-salamu alaykum ayyuha as-subyan. He said, As-salamu alaykum, oh young boys. And then if he passed by a group of women, he would say, As-salamu alaykum. And he would say, As-salamu alaykum to the women. If he passed by the women, he would say, As-salamu alaykum to them. And on what Anas says that the Prophet ﷺ was in the habit of visiting him, visiting his mother. Not for the sake of visiting his mother, but for the sake of visiting Anas's younger brother, who was like 3 years old. The Prophet ﷺ used to go to Anas's mother's house just to spend time with that 3-year-old boy. And he used to call him Abu Umayr. He used to call him the 3-year-old boy, and he used to call him the father of the little Omar. Umayr is a little Omar, right? Umayr, like I would be called Hushayn, right? Hushayn. And Anas was called Unais, little Anas. So the Prophet ﷺ called this little brother of Anas, he called him the father of a little Omar. And he would say, Ya Aba Umayr, ma fa'ala al-Nughayr. He would say, Oh Abu Umayr, what did your little red-beaked bird do today? And because he had a red-beaked bird that he used to keep as a pet. And he would ask him, what did your red-beaked bird do today? In a rhyming way. This is like you have nursery rhymes, right? The Prophet ﷺ came up with this phrase that rhymed, and the boy didn't really understand it, but he knew that it rhymed. And so it chimed for him, and he would smile. And the Prophet ﷺ would go and visit that young boy. And on one occasion, he visited him, and he asked him that question, and he said, Ya Aba Umayr, ma fa'ala al-Nughayr? What's the news of your little red bird today? What's the news? And the boy started crying, and he turned to the mother of Anas, and she said that the bird had died. And so the Prophet ﷺ comforted the child. He comforted. And this was his way. With Al-Hasan and Hussein, we have so many stories about Al-Hasan and Hussein. He was holding Al-Hasan, and he would stick out his tongue to Al-Hasan. Right? And Al-Hasan is in his bosom. And he would stick out his tongue to Al-Hasan. And Al-Hasan would grab and reach for his tongue, and every time he reached for it, the Prophet would put his tongue back in his mouth. And then he'd stick his tongue out again, and he'd put his tongue back in his mouth every time he reached for it. And people related that to us. We have one example of the Sahabi that he says that we were praying behind the Prophet ﷺ on one occasion, and the Prophet ﷺ was very prolonged in his sujood. And the narrator says, so I came out of my sujood, and I saw him still prostrated, but with Al-Hussein on his back. And so I went down and prostrated again. And so after the prayer, some of the other companions said, Ya Rasulullah, is everything okay? We thought that something happened to you, or we thought that you were getting revelation. And so the Prophet ﷺ said, no. My son, Ibni, my son had to mount me for a trip that he was on, for a journey that he was taking. He had to mount me, and so I didn't want to disturb him while he was to mount the back of the Prophet. Now, so this was his way with his own companions. We have examples where the Prophet ﷺ, there's so much that I can talk about, where the Prophet ﷺ was approached by an old woman, and she asked the Prophet ﷺ, O Prophet of Allah, ask Allah to enter me into paradise. And he said, La yadkhulu al-jannata 'alayk. He said, old women don't enter paradise. And she went away crying. And so the Prophet ﷺ said, bring her back. And so when she came back, the Prophet ﷺ said, when you enter paradise, you will enter in the age of Jesus with the beauty of Joseph. And then he recited the verse, Inna ja'alnahunna abkara uruban atraba bi ashabihim. That we made them young maidens pleasing to their husbands and of compatible age. On another occasion, the Prophet okay, so this requires a little bit of context. There was one Sahabi specifically known for his sense of humor, and his name was Al-Nu'ayman. Who has heard of Al-Nu'ayman in this room? Al-Nu'ayman. Anyone hear about Nu'ayman? Nu'ayman was a practical joker among the Sahaba. He was a total practical joker. He would play tricks on everyone. And he would even play tricks on the Prophet. And he came from the Badiyah. He was among the Bedouins, and the Prophet ﷺ was in the Medina. And the Prophet ﷺ used to love him so much. And he would say, Nu'ayman Badina wa nahnu hadiruhu. That Nu'ayman is our Bedouin. He's our Bedouin. He's our access to the Bedouins. and we are his access to the city dwellers. So Nu'ayman, whenever he would come into Medina, he used to bring the Prophet ﷺ a gift. But on many occasions, after he brings in the gift, like it would be something to eat, or it would be honey. On one occasion he brought him honey. On another occasion he brought him meat to eat, and other such gifts. And so the next day, Nu'ayman would come back to the Prophet with the person from whom he bought the honey, or with the person from whom he bought the meat. And so the Prophet ﷺ would open the door, and they would enter, and he said, "What brings you, Nu'ayman?" And Nu'ayman said, "Well, remember the honey I bought you yesterday?" He said, "Yes." He said, "Well, here's the merchant. He wants his money." So the Prophet ﷺ said, "You told me this was a gift." And so Nu'ayman said, "Yes, I wanted to give it to you as a gift, but I had no money." And so the Prophet ﷺ would pay the man whatever that costed, and he would just laugh with Nu'ayman about it. He would just laugh and laugh with it. And this happened multiple times with Nu'ayman. On one occasion, Nu'ayman, the Prophet ﷺ was in the masjid, and he was visited by another Bedouin who came and tied his camel. And he went into the masjid, and the Sahaba were sitting outside of the masjid with Nu'ayman. And so Hamza, alayhi salam, tells Nu'ayman, he says, "Nu'ayman, if only you would slaughter this camel, and we would eat of its meat. We haven't had meat for a long time. And if you do so, we'll have the Prophet pay for it." So Hamza is this is Nu'ayman's trick, which is to make the Prophet pay for gifts. So Hamza here is suggesting to him to do the same thing with his camel. And so Nu'ayman said, "That's a great idea." And so he slaughters the camel. And when he realizes, what he's just done, he runs for cover, and he tells the Sahaba, "Don't tell the Prophet about where I am and what I've done. Don't tell him anything." And they said, "Okay, we won't tell him. We won't tell him. Don't worry. Your secret is safe with us." And so Nu'ayman runs, and he heads for the hills, and he finds another companion far away, and he tells that companion, "If the Prophet ﷺ walks by here, don't tell him I was here." And he hid himself in a hole, and he covered that hole up with leaves and trees and things like that. He covered his hole up, and he was underground, just making sure that when the Sahaba walked by, that they would walk by and he would go on his way. So the Prophet ﷺ, the Bedouin Arab came out, and he started to scream about what happened to his camel. "What happened to my camel?" And so the Prophet ﷺ turned to Hamza and the others, and he said, "What happened to, what is this? What happened?" And they said, "Nu'ayman." And he said, "Where is Nu'ayman? What drove him to do this?" And so they said, "He went that way." And so the Prophet ﷺ went after him, and he found the Sahabi who was hiding him. And he said, "Have you seen Nu'ayman?" And the Sahaba said, "Nope. I haven't seen him. I didn't see Nu'ayman. Nu'ayman, what, he came by here?" And so the Prophet ﷺ uncovered Nu'ayman, and he came out, and he said, "What possessed you to do what you have done?" What possessed you? He wasn't laughing yet, but he said, "What possessed you to do what you have done?" And the Bedouin Arab was there, the owner of the camel. He said, "What possessed you to do what you have done?" And so Nu'ayman said, "It was Hamza wa Ashabi. Hamza and his companions, they put me up to it." And they all just laughed and laughed and laughed. And the Prophet ﷺ paid the man the worth of that camel and more. He paid him because there's i'ta fi haqq. That when you fulfill someone's right, you fulfill it with generosity. You fulfill it generously. So the man was happy, and he laughed, and the Prophet laughed, and it was just great. But Nu'ayman also, on one occasion, he and Abu Bakr, they go out on a trip. And Nu'ayman is Abu Bakr, Nu'ayman, and Nu'ayman's cousin. And Nu'ayman's cousin is in charge of rationing out the food and the drink, right? The food and the drink. And so they get to a certain place, and Nu'ayman is starving, and he really needs to eat, and Abu Bakr is not there. Abu Bakr is off doing something, right? So they're all traveling together. Abu Bakr leaves them to take care of some need of his, and then he'll come back. And so Nu'ayman says to his cousin, just bring me something, I have to get something. And so his cousin says, we better wait for Abu Bakr to come back. Just be patient, we'll wait for Abu Bakr to come back. That didn't go over well with Nu'ayman. That didn't go over well with him at all. And so Nu'ayman said, okay, if that's the way it's going to be, that's the way it's going to be. So Nu'ayman took advantage, and when Abu Bakr came back, they all went, they all traveled to the next village or something like that, and Nu'ayman saw some Arabs there, and he said to them, in private, he said, I have a slave that I'd like to sell to you. I have a slave I'd like to sell to you. And so he said, they said, sure, we're in need of, we're in need of another servant, because we have this and that, we're interested. And so Nu'ayman said, but there's something about the servant, he's got a long tongue. His tongue is just, tawil lisan, right? He's got a, he'll curse, he'll deny that he's a slave, and he'll even tell you that he's my cousin. But if you want him, he's yours. If you don't, then don't waste my time. So he's negotiating with them. They said, no, we understand and everything, but we want him, is he a good worker, he's this and that? He said, yes. Okay, so he said, okay, so if you're interested, then let's shake hands. They shook hands, and they gave him 10 camels as a deposit. And they would give him the rest when he would deliver the slave, right? So they gave him 10 camels. And so when he came back, and he brought them to his cousin, and he said, there he is, right there, you can have him. And the man said, what, this is not, I'm his cousin, what are you talking? They said, we know your story. We've been told all about you. And they grabbed him with force, and they put around his neck the yoke that they would put around the necks of slaves. So they put around his neck, and they put that around his neck, and they took him off. And when Abu Bakr finally came back, and he missed all of this, when he finally came back, he said, where's your cousin? He said, oh. So Abu Bakr said, this. So they all went to them again, and they all caught up with them, and Abu Bakr said, you guys have been, he gave it all away. He said, this is not, you guys have all been deceived. Here's your camel, and your camel's back, and give us back our guy. And so they all went back to the Prophet ﷺ, and when the Prophet ﷺ heard that, he laughed so much. And they said that for an entire year, whenever that story was mentioned, the Prophet would burst into laughter. Right. No. There's so much that, let's see if I've been skipping around a little bit. So, what time is it? When am I supposed to be over? I have 12 minutes? I wonder if I can... And he used to tease also, the Prophet ﷺ used to tease his companions. On one occasion he had let me see if I can find it here. Yes, on one occasion, and Anas is relating this hadith, he said, عن أنس رضي الله عنه أن رجلا من أهل البادية يقال له زاهر. Oh, I'm sorry. What I said about Nu'ayman as being from the Badia and the Prophet ﷺ from the Medina, and he would say that Nu'ayman is our Bedouin, and we are his city people, that wasn't for Nu'ayman, that was for Zahir. That was for Zahir, not Nu'ayman. Nu'ayman was always there in Medina. But the Prophet ﷺ, or Anas who says that there was a man who was named Zahir, and he used to come from the Badia. And he would visit the Prophet ﷺ, and the Prophet would say this about him. And he was not known for being particularly attractive, to say the least. he knew this about himself. Other people knew this about him as well. That he had this quality about himself. But of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah looks at your hearts. He doesn't look at your physical forms. So the Prophet ﷺ surprised him. He found him in the middle of a marketplace, and he surprised him from behind, and he grabbed him. He grabbed him from behind, right? So Zahid has his back to the Prophet's chest, his noble chest, and when he's grabbed like that, he wrestles out. He doesn't know who's grabbing him, but he wrestles out of the grab, and he notices that the Prophet ﷺ is behind him. So he grabs the Prophet's arms and then embraces himself again with the Prophet's arms, and he sticks his chest into the Prophet's, his back into the Prophet's chest even more. He presses his back into the Prophet's chest. Sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And so the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam says, "Man yashtari al-abd," and he says it in a very loud voice, "Man yashtari al-abd." Who will buy this slave from me? Who will buy this slave from me? Right? And he says this very loud so that people can hear. Who will buy this slave from me? And so Zahid says, "Idan wallahi tajiduni kasida." He said, by God, if your intention is to sell me into slavery, you're not going to make very much money out of me. Right? And there's growing up, he felt, this left in he was mistreated. So you can just fill in the blanks here. I mean, where does that come from? Where does a statement like that come from? Tajiduni kasida. You will find me, you'll sell me for just pennies. Where does that come from? If not after years and years and years of abuse. From the time that he was a child until the time he reached old age, people know that he's just not, and people talk, and people look at you in a certain way, and it affects the person's soul. It affects them. And so this was part of his disposition now. It was part of his personality. To look down upon himself, because others had looked down upon him. And so he said this. He says, "Tajiduni billahi tajiduni kasida." If this is your intention, you're not going to make very much money out of it. And he was jesting with the Prophet. He was joking. But a lot of truth is said in jest. Right? I mean, this didn't just come out of a vacuum. It didn't come out of nowhere. It's something he felt deep. And so he said, "You will find me, not very worthy, not very precious." And so the Prophet ﷺ said, the Prophet ﷺ said, "Lakin anta inda Allahi ghalib." And if we look at the Prophet's answer, ﷺ, he said, "But you are precious with Allah. You are precious in the eyes of Allah. You are precious with Him." He could have said, وَلَكِنَّكَ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ غَالِبٌ, but you are precious with Allah. Actually, if we look into it a little deeper, he could have said, وَلَكِنَّكَ غَالٍ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ, and that's the default. That's, if you're going to say the sentence in a default fashion, وَلَكِنَّكَ غَالٍ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ, but you are precious with Allah. Right? But you are precious with Allah. But the Prophet ﷺ changes two things in this sentence. And he says, وَلَكِنْ. He doesn't say وَلَكِنَّكَ. He doesn't say وَلَكِنَّكَ with the pronoun, right? The suffix pronoun, وَلَكِنَّكَ. He says, وَلَكِنْ أَنْتَ. وَلَكِنْ أَنْتَ. And he says أَنْتَ, which is ضمير منفصل. It's not منفصل. It's a separate pronoun. It's not attached. It's not a suffix pronoun. It's a standalone pronoun. He says, وَلَكِنْ أَنْتَ, and he doesn't say غَالٍ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ. He says, وَلَكِنْ أَنْتَ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ غَالٍ. And there's tashweeq in that. There's tashweeq in that. There's a sort of suspense. It's a rhetorical device for suspense, where you postpone the predicate all the way to the end of the sentence. The khabar comes all the way at the end of the sentence. So where the Prophet ﷺ is saying here, but you, وَلَكِنْ أَنْتَ, and in anta, when he tells him anta, he's giving him a sense of identity. He's giving him confidence within himself. He doesn't say walakinnaka, which would be like your precious with God. He said, no, you. And there's an emphasis on the anta here. You, if you translate this into English, you would say, Y-O-U, capital letters. You are, comma, in the eyes, in the sight of Allah, comma, precious. Right? So there's a double emphasis here. But you, O Zahid, you, with Allah, you are precious. And this was his way. This was his way. With his warm smile, with his laughter, with the way that he used to pick people up, and he would never let them look down upon themselves. And he would say, Al-Mu'min la yuzillu nafsah. The mu'min doesn't put himself down. He doesn't humiliate himself. He is humble, but he doesn't humiliate himself. And he would not allow Zahid to actually, he would not allow Zahid to entertain those thoughts. And if the Prophet ﷺ, if the Prophet of Allah is telling you that you are precious with Allah, then how can Zahid ever look upon himself in the same way again? Khalas, it was all gone from his heart. Everything, all those years of psychological abuse that he had taken, all those years of looking upon himself the way that people looked at him, all those years, they all dissolved in an instant with one word from the best of creation. From the best of creation. It all just dissipated. And that was our Prophet, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. That was our Prophet. And that was his sunnah. That was his sunnah vis-a-vis other people. That's how he engaged the people around him. How am I doing on time? Somebody get the umbrella. 5 minutes. No, 2. He only has 2. No. On one occasion, there was a battle. On one occasion, there was a battle, and after the battle, there were people who were looking for their loved ones on the battlefield. And there was a woman who was looking for her husband, and she was frantic about her husband. And she said to the Prophet ﷺ, she went all the way to the Prophet ﷺ, and she said, Ya Rasulullah, have you seen my husband? Have you seen my husband? He said, do you mean the one with the white in his eyes? The whiteness in his eyes? She said, what happened to my husband?